In the first episode we saw how rockets work, so now I can start with the real deal, space missions. And we'll start from the very beginning. How did this whole rocket thing start?
Plus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
To get to the beginning, we have to go back in time some centuries to ancient China, where it is believed that around the year 300 an alchemist may be trying to create a potion for immortality mixed saltpeter, charcoal and sulfur, inventing gunpowder. Some centuries passed until it was discovered that gunpowder could be used to make weapons, and firearms started being developed in the 12th century. What does this have to do with rockets? I'm glad you asked. The use of gunpowder was the first time controlled explosions were used to propel something. Besides, gunpowder wasn't just used for weapons. Thanks to gunpowder, the first fireworks were made, which are essentially a primitive version of solid fuel rockets. The Chinese managed to keep the formula secret for a long time, but when the Mongols invaded China, they got it. The Mongol Empire, which was the largest in history by the way, reached the Arabian territory, and the secret formula stopped being secret. From then on, it spread like wildfire, and soon the whole Euro-Asiatic continent knew how to blow stuff up. Now let's go to a more recent time. On the 5th of October 1882, Robert Goddard was born in Massachusetts, United States. He was fascinated by science and technology, and he decided that he wanted to contribute to the creation of things that could someday go to space. When he finished his studies on physics, he started working as a teacher, which allowed him to finance his experiments. He came to the conclusion that for a rocket to go far, the most efficient thing to do was to make it have various stages. That means that it would be separated in various parts, all of them with their own fuel tank and its own engine. That way, when the first stage runs out of fuel, it is decoupled and the rest of the rocket continues its way without carrying the useless weight of an empty fuel tank. On March 23, 1912, a very special person is born in the German Empire. We'll talk about him later. Goddard started his launches with solid fuel rockets, which were the only ones that existed in 1915, with promising results. Basically, he designed, financed, built and launched his rockets without much help, although in the end he had investors and partners. He even proposed the army the creation of the weapon that we know today as bazooka. At the same time, he was publishing his work, but more often than not, he was ridiculed by the press. The New York Times printed that the rocket could never fly in the vacuum of space. Some years later, Goddard proved that in fact rocket engines work more efficiently in the vacuum because they didn't have to counter the effect of air pressure. In 1926, he developed and launched the first liquid fuel rocket in history, which reached 12.5 meters of altitude. After perfecting its design for years, he managed to make a liquid fuel rocket that reached 2.6 kilometers of altitude in 1937. But the press kept attacking him every time he mentioned the use of rockets in space, so he decided to promote his inventions for the use on atmospheric investigation, although their use for space is what really fascinated him. Remember the guy I mentioned earlier? His name is Werner von Braun. He was inspired since he was little by authors like Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and he decided that what he liked was space, and he wanted to make getting there something possible. He studied mechanical engineer and got a PhD in physics. To be able to finance his investigations, he focused on the military applications of the technology, so he worked in the German army. Let's take a look to the Soviet Union, where a man has been arrested and taken to the Gulag for spending too much money in investigating liquid fuel engines instead of solid rocket engines. We'll see his story later. In 1933, Adolf Hitler took power in Germany, which was devastated and ruined after World War I. not just because of the battles, but also due to the terms imposed by the winners after their defeat. I'm telling you this because it's impossible to understand the story of space exploration without knowing history itself, because they are closely tied. And one of the inflection points is World War II. So the next stop of our trip is the Nazi Germany. In 1939, furious because of the Treaty of Versailles and having built a devastating army, the Germans began their attack, their revenge. France and Poland are one of the first to fall before the tremendous German power. Germany invaded almost all France, leaving the United Kingdom as the last Western European country of the old Allies during World War I. Hitler sent troops to Africa and betrayed the Soviet Union, ending their agreement of no aggression and starting its invasion. Germany seems unstoppable. Japan joined the war on the German side with the goal of defeating their enemy of the Pacific, the United States. The bombing of Pearl Harbor, a very important military port located in Hawaii, provoked that the United States joined the war as well. The Soviet Union managed to stop the German army in Stalingrad. That, combined with the support of the United States to the UK and the West Front, made the Germans start losing ground. In 1944, von Braun's team developed the V-1 missile, a bomb with wings and an engine that was launched multiple times to the UK and Belgium, especially against London. Soon after, they developed the V-2, the first long-range missile, which was the father of all rockets, and was used for the same purposes as the V-1. This was extremely advanced technology for that time, but it came too late for Germany, who had almost lost already, and they didn't have a big impact on the war, but they did have an impact on London. Finally, the Soviet Union from the east, and the UK, France and the US from the west took Germany and the war ended. Although they had been on the same side, tensions between the US and the USSR started growing, and they ultimately led to the Cold War. Right after World War II ended, both countries competed to get the German scientists, which were the best at the time. Von Braun had already had problems with the German police when he said that he didn't care about Hitler's goal and he just cared about space travel. So he contacted the Allies and surrendered to the United States on May 3, 1945, along with 500 more scientists and some prototypes. They came very close to being captured by the Soviets, who wanted to include von Braun in Sergei Kirillov's team. He's the man who was taken to the Gulag that I mentioned earlier, and is considered the Soviet counterpart of von Braun. In the rest of the episode I'm going to focus on Kirillov's work, although von Braun's story is far from over. Robert Goddard died on August 10, 1945 due to esophageal cancer. Close to the end of World War II, Kirillov started working on rocket engines from a prison he'd been taken to from the Gulag. a place he had left with health problems he would keep for the rest of his life. Finally, the government forgave him and admitted that his sentence had been unfair. After the beginning of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union began increasing their military power and getting ready for a nuclear war. They worked for years on more powerful ballistic missiles capable of taking bombs further away, not to fall behind the other in case of an engagement. Korolev and his team developed the first R-7 class rockets with military purposes, the best of the best back then, and they became the most commonly used rockets by the Russians until present time. It's kind of funny that the technology of space travel comes from intercontinental nuclear missiles. Soon after, some people started suggesting to launch something to space, but without much success. In 1957, the idea of launching a satellite to space appeared in the American press, fueling the flame in the Soviet Union, which decided to do so first during the International Geophysical Year organized by the United Nations between 1957 and 1958. The development of the Sputnik 1 lasted less than a month and was kept a secret until it was launched to prevent the Americans from doing it first. Sputnik means satellite. The design was quite simple and was not much more than a metal ball with a transmitter, instruments to measure temperature, and batteries. Korolev personally led the assembly, and the work was frenetic. Finally, on October 4, 1957, the Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite ever, was launched aboard an R-7 rocket from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in the current desert of Kazakhstan, which was then part of the Soviet Union. The Sputnik had a 65-degree inclined orbit, which was elliptical as well, with an apoapsis of 939 kilometers and a periapsis of 215 kilometers. How will the Americans respond? What will the next step be for the Soviets? We'll see that in the next episode of the story of space exploration, the first human in space. Soon on Planet Genesis.